It was.
Yeah, and this acts as a chock. So if you're single pilot pushing your airplane back, as long as you do it with precision, your airplane's not going to go in the water. So, as Susan said, when this airplane was parked, the ground was quite soft, obviously. So an old ski flying trick that probably a lot of you know is if your airplane is frozen to the surface, then you get another person at the other wing, at the wing junction there with the strut and the wing, and push upwards there, and you rock the airplane using two people. This usually frees up the gear. Well, in this instance, it sure looked like it was doing it, but it didn't. This is the worst frozen down airplane I've ever run into. That didn't work. So let's see. What did we try next, Susan?
Well, we got shovels and we shoveled the snow and ice out from around the wheels to give it less rolling resistance when we did get it moving. Chiseled ice out from under the tail wheel also. And then we found some scrap lumber. So we were using like 2x4s to pry the wheels. So just to get some leverage under there and pry them off the ground.
And then I think ultimately, did we use a winch, an electric winch for this, or did we use it to put it back in its spot?
That was when we were parking it again.
Okay, all right, yeah. So some people have electric winches to assist in this sort of situation. Of course, you have to be able to attach it at a point that works for your operation. I didn't really want to use that in this instance because the side of the clubhouse was so close to the edge of the wing that I didn't want to mess that up. So another thing that a person could do is attach a tow line to their vehicle. But again, this needs to be done with care. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating this for getting unstuck, although it might help. But in snowy ramp situations, having a vehicle that I can help pull from behind instead of trying to push back has been very helpful, especially with skis, because the back end of them tends to just scoop snow and dig in because they're down next to the ground. They're not up like a ski tip is. So ultimately, let's see. Oh, we also had a brake that was frozen.
Oh, we did. I forgot about the brakes being frozen.
Yeah. So eventually, we thought about a number of different methods to free up these brakes, but we just thought we'd try brute force first. Now, when I say brute force, I say that jokingly because you never want to force anything on an airplane, especially when it's cold. You're going to break something. However, in this instance, I knew that if we simply pushed forward and aft on the strut as a team, that most likely it would break this wheel free, and that's what happened. So we lucked out with that. Otherwise, we might have had to employ a space heater or, yeah, that's the only method I'm going to say right now because anything else is a little jiggy, although there's other ones. So we did that. Anything else on that topic, Susan, or any others?
Yeah, I didn't know if you wanted to talk about brooms or ways of getting snow off the wing.
Yeah, let's see. I think we're going to get there. So how about if I run a jump into covers?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Because when we parked the plane at the end of the day, we got it in there. It was all clean. We came back from flying, and we wanted to keep it clean. So we rummaged around in the clubhouse, and there were at least 3 different sets of wing covers in there. And we found what appeared to be the nicest ones, and it had the windshield cover that fit together with the wing covers. And so that took us another hour to get all the covers on.
Yeah, you have to learn them. Well, and then I remember looking at this tail cover thinking, well, that's not very nice. And then come to find out, after we were all done, went back to the clubhouse, I said to myself, oh, I wonder what's in this bin here. And we found the really nice new covers.
Yeah.
So here we go. We're not going to belabor this point because many of you know covers. They're simply, prevention is definitely your biggest friend, and you definitely need an engine cover in Alaska. I guess the main points to know is that there are two main types, mesh versus nylon. Mesh types are a little bit lighter and packed down a little bit smaller than nylon, which is basically a tent fabric. Here we have the nylon fabric, and here. And here we have the mesh, which is typically black. Here's a picture of the mesh. In this instance, they have made a dual fabric wing cover. So mesh, I have a set of those, and I've also owned a set of nylon. Pros and cons is sometimes the mesh in a environment like Anchorage that is often freezing, refreezing, melting, going back and forth. Sometimes you can have melt water go through the little holes in the mesh. And then when you pull your wing cover off, you can end up with a little dappled surface area. So usually that doesn't happen. It's amazing how little that has happened for me, but it can happen. And then you have to deal with the resulting ice on the top of your wing, if that's the case. Nylon, though, isn't perfect. I mean, it's possible that you could have things melt and run underneath nylon, although it's not very common. So pros and cons to each kind. The thing that I would highly recommend is spoilers, which are pictured here, the yellow spoiler on top of the wing. This spoils the lift, which is great in the parking spot. If we have a winter storm come through, then it's less stress on your airframe because your airframe is not trying to fly as much. It is also a great thing for survival of your airplane. For instance, this has happened to me. I got stuck on a lake at the base of a glacier, and I had an engine problem. And I didn't want to fly out of there with that engine problem. So I had to leave the airplane overnight and leave, call a friend and leave. So I knew that the wind was going to roar down that glacier at some point before I could get back there with the mechanic. So luckily I had brought, it's my standard procedure to bring all of my covers. So I put my spoilers on. And unfortunately, I only had one set of ice screws at the time, and they were in the ice, buried super deep at Lake Hood. So I literally would have had to chip them all the way out to access them and take them with me. So I had to find alternate methods to keep my airplane secure at the base of this glacier. So I ended up doing what I could in the moment, which was I buried the skis with snow and included some small brush so that hopefully it would freeze in a semi-solid form and keep the airplane from moving in the wind. That, along with these spoilers, really did the trick, because I heard later that it indeed was blowing very strong there. So I was really glad to have those that day. Now, I have two sets of ice screws, one that always stays in the airplane, and one that if I'm tying down on the lake surface regularly at Lake Hood, I use those and they usually stay in place. Lessons learned. Important thing about wing covers, again, mistakes I've made that you guys can hopefully avoid is make sure they stay dry between uses before you stuff them into a bag, or else you'll hate yourself later because they'll be moldy and stinky. So some people hang them up in their garage. When I've been lucky enough to have a parking spot that's next to a fence at the airport, I hang them on the fence with clips. Tail covers are also important because you're going to have to clean the ice off that surface if you don't use them. Windshield covers, I personally like them because then I don't have to scrape my windscreen. And as you guys know, the more you make contact with that windscreen, with anything that gets scratched, the more you're going to scratch or craze it. And then when you run into situations such as landing with the sun sort of in your eyes, then it makes it much more difficult to see out. A way to mitigate that, of course, is to use a cover so you don't have to scrape it. Now, some people say, well, if it's not well fitting and could be blown around in the wind, and if there was a little bit of dirt that got underneath it, it's possible that it could rub the dirt between the cover and the windscreen. So I personally have never had that problem because my cover fits extremely well, and I was taught by someone smarter than me a long time ago to never let it touch the ground, and fold it up with the inside in so that you could never get any dirt in it. So far, so good. De-ice. So this is harder with small airplanes, right? What do you do with Alaska Airlines? Oh, you're muted. But for Alaska Airlines, it's all very procedural, right? You have exact procedure.
Is. We call it the ice truck. we follow our configure to de-ice checklist.
Exactly, right. Like type 1, maybe followed by type 3, 160 degrees, 130 at the nozzle.
Yep. We're usually just type 1. If it's snowing hard, we might have to use type 4. But
okay, all right. So there's all these, it's very cut and dried, right? Unless you have ground icing conditions, this makes it more difficult for all of us. But pretty much if you had ground icing conditions, might be one of the only reasons you couldn't go, right? So again, prevention is key. So what Susan and I had to do was really the most nightmarish state of affairs I've ever run into with a light aircraft. And now I think all the rest of the guys at our flying club, you know, were waiting just for us to discover it so they wouldn't have to do it. Pretty smart. So we did it. And so I personally have my own broom, kind of like this, and I have made sure that on the brush side, I don't have anything that could rub against the wings. I remember buying one like this and having to reverse the hardware a little bit. Yeah, I just, I've damaged my airplane before de-icing, and it made me sick, and I never wanted to do that again. So maybe I'm a little paranoid, but I also have labeled mine aircraft only, and my kids know if they ever use this on the floor, they're dead meat. Here's a snow broom. This is a lot stiffer and is a lot quicker at getting a mass off quickly. You can buy these at lots of places in town. What about, let's say you have frost on your wing in a seaplane. How do you get up there? Well, this is one idea. And you could use this on an airplane for even working frost off through friction. You throw, I believe this is a Cecil rope, over the top of the wing and rub the length back and forth in your hands over the top of the wing. Pretty smart. And a lot of times I end up brushing off the final bits, the finer points, big gloves. Fabric versus metal. Well, fabric paint sometimes is not quite as flexible as the fabric itself in super cold conditions. So that's one thing to think about when de-icing, is to do it with care. Metal airplanes, that's a bit easier. So what Susan and I did is we got to the point where we realized we literally could not manually de-ice that airplane anymore. So at that point, you got a choice to make. You could pay for de-ice truck, or you might have a home setup, which are available, or you can use a hanger. But you know what? For the first 23 years of my flying life, that was not an option. So I did a lot of prevention with covers. So here we have the most proper method of product to use for de-ice fluid. You can buy this probably at local places. You can buy it online. Here's more information about it here. And it can be put in, this is an aircraft specific bottle. Now, this bit is really expensive. This is a probe heater that goes in the top of this. Well, problem is, when I looked this up, it was about $700. I don't know about you guys, but it's kind of a lot of money. So you can do things this way, and if you know, it's a great way to go, right? Because a de-ice truck each time is, de-ice spray would probably be a couple $100, I would guess. Not sure, maybe somebody can tell me at the end. So here we have another alternate method. There's lots of ways that people have figured out to make this a little easier, okay? While still being legal and safe. So Here we have de-ice fluid, which is, by the way, composed of these items down the bottom. Going back. A very smart friend of mine, who is the owner of a flight school locally, showed me his setup one time, where he has a metal empty fire can from a local place that has parts and pieces to build fire equipment. He bought an empty one from him that was metal so that he could heat it safely. Now he heated his with a heating pad attached to the base here. Brilliant. Bush pilots throughout the years have figured out other ways, like using a metal can and heating it on the stove, or simply put in the correct proportion of the de-ice fluid with the correct proportion of extremely hot water, and then spray immediately. Very critical thing to understand once you have de-iced the airplane with whatever method is that you may have refreeze, for instance, if you haven't used de-ice fluid. De-ice fluid lowers the freeze point, and therefore you're not going to have, for instance, the water freeze at 31 degrees. It would have to be much colder than that. But some people simply push the airplane into the hangar, like Susan and I did. But if you aren't careful with that method, if it doesn't fully melt and drip off and dry, or mostly dry, then the melted ice may refreeze on important surfaces of the airplane. So it's extremely important to do a control check before takeoff, as you all learned before your private pilot check ride. And also be aware that sometimes you can't see ice very easily if it's clear. So always do a tactile check with your bare hand on certain surfaces that are very critical, the top of the wing and leading edge. Now you guys know that most of our layered aircraft are not certified into known icing conditions. If yours was, you'd know it. You can look in your aircraft manual and know for sure though. There are a number of FARs that prohibit takeoff with snow, ice, or frost. Now this 91-527, which is what many of us would operate under in our light aircraft, this actually is for large airplanes. However, when you look at the FAR 91.3 and 91.13, there are a number of other reasons why we might consider being very careful beyond the physics of what happens with ice, why we would consider to be very careful to take off without ice. Unfortunately, my link here is not working. I was hoping to show you what was the NTSB final report about the Cessna Caravan that crashed after takeoff in Dillingham, Alaska. I was flying a Saab in that morning, and it was a very somber scene because the Caravan had just crashed 10 minutes earlier. And that's a place that none of us want to be. But the basic gist of the NTSB report was there was some trace ice on the top of the wing that isn't super easy to see. So again, always use your bare hand for a tactile check. I know that we're only talking about how to get the airplane ready for departure, but this is an extremely important concept as part of this. So there's a lot of great links here. I'm not going to go through all of them during this presentation, but just know that it's something to be taken extremely seriously. I will share a little bit so you guys can see this awesome website that has tons of great tools, as you can see here. This is from NASA. And as you can see, it was developed by the Icing branch at the Glenn Research Center. I'm gonna just show you a couple things here from these sections. And then I just wanted to show you all the wonderful things that if you wanted to dig into this, you could really increase your knowledge should you so choose, including gain experience that's cheaper, right? Not your own. I would highly recommend checking out these emergency modules. And there's some modules in here that also talk about weather, how to try to figure out for sure if there's ice or not. The answer is you never really know for sure that there isn't, but you sure can become a more educated pilot. So I just wanted to talk for a second about why it's important for us to de-ice our airplanes. Now here we see a pretty heavy layer, but as you can see here, it has all these effects. Most of us would be worried about taking off and climbing out. As you can see, there's some accident analysis here. Not analysis, just a situation. Now this happened when both wing leading edges were covered with approximately 3/16 of ice. Get us to another page here. Another extremely critical area of the aircraft is not just the leading edge, but also mostly we build up on the leading edge in flight. But from a pre-flight perspective, a lot of times we could have ice there, but we could also have it over the top curved area or the chord of the wing there. And that is also an extremely critical area, as you might imagine, and as we will see. Stand by while I get to the good stuff. These look like a lot of good charts, but I wasn't able to determine the exact values of how they made them, so I didn't want to bring them to you without knowing that. So, handling effects of ice on the airframe. Did you guys know that there's such a thing as a tail stall? Not just a wing stall. Here's what I thought was a great demonstration of the loss of lift due to ice. I'm going to play it for you. The wing stalls at a lower AOA, or angle of attack, because of this separation. Depending upon if you have unequal ice accumulation, then you may end up with, as they say here, other sorts of upsets, undesirable. And then it talks about tail stalls. We won't go through it extensively, but I'll just play it for you. There's a lot going on here. I'm not going to try to keep up with it because I haven't practiced enough. So now you can see the tail acts like an upside down wing. I believe it's going to show us here. Show us some icing. Nope, just that. So if you guys want to go through a lot of this, you may on your own. Here it is. The upside down wing has the separation just like the right side up wing. I won't bore you with too much more of this, but I personally find this pretty fascinating. Stand by one. No. We're going to pull out of that for now. Suffice to say, there's a lot to know about this, about the weather, how to brief yourself. The important thing to do is that you are prepared to make a 180 out of the conditions that your aircraft cannot handle. Now, something to think about with winter flying conditions, and the reason I'm talking about this is because it goes to the pre-flight flight and the pilot's pre-flight preparation and planning, which may start days in advance. We've all been tempted to do things because of outside pressures or internal pressures that we put on ourselves. But it's very important that all of us throughout our flying careers think of, examine ourselves and say, truthfully say, have I developed any of these 5 hazardous attitudes recently? For instance, invulnerability can happen when you're such a new pilot that you don't really know all the bad things that can happen, or it can happen when you've got a lot of time and experience and just somehow, you've gotten away with whatever, flying in ice or whatever that a person might do, flying in instrument conditions, for instance, if you're not properly rated in a properly equipped aircraft. And sometimes people get away with these things for a long time in their life and they think that they're invulnerable, but nobody is. And in the last year, I had 2 old friends of mine pass away and take people with them. And it was because of their choices to do those things. So any of us can fall prey to these attitudes. So why do I bring this up now? Well, just to be careful and do the hard work to de-ice the airplane and do a really good brief for yourself prior to flying. So again, there's more about aeronautical decision making here on this page. If you wish to dive into it more, this is a really great tool available to you. It's a risk assessment tool, which is very helpful to say, okay, as a checklist, to make sure that we discipline ourselves to look at all the factors, think about all the factors. Without this tool, you might not even think about a factor that truly exists simply because of an experience or being in a hurry. And a good risk assessment tool then will allow you to rank the risk and say, is this a really big deal? I'm not going to fly, or is it kind of a small deal? And maybe I can mitigate it by taking some other action here, here, and here. But it's a great tool to help with your aeronautical decision making. Again, I'm not going to dive deep into these items here. The tutorial, the NASA tutorial that there's links to a couple of pages prior, have tons of great information. But just know that icing could exist even if it's not reported, of course. And so you just need to always have a plan, a backup plan of what if and how do I save myself, my plane and my passengers. And again, always have a plan to make a 180 out, and don't just leave yourself with one alternate, have several alternates. I would tell my students, look, if you've only got one alternate plan or one out, that's not enough. So make 3 outs or more. And if one of them goes away, consider not continuing forward, because you never want to leave yourself with only 1 out, or much less, God forbid, no outs. That is all I have. Susan, do you have anything more entertaining than what I just talked about?
No, that is so much good information, Carol. Thank you. No, I mean, our long story short, we spent 2 whole days monkeying around with this airplane, and we finally got to fly for an hour and a half. And then we got back right at dark, and it took us a solid hour to park it. That's when we had to get the pulley out because it wouldn't roll back into the parking spot. So we had to get the pulley to tug it back in there and then get it all tied down again. So it was quite the adventure for me, and quite an eye-opening experience into winter flying in Alaska. So
I guess, Jackie, what do you think? Should we open it up to questions or comments?
Yeah, I was gonna say, anyone who wants to ask questions, maybe write it in the group chat. That might be easier. That way we're not all talking over each other. If you just go to the right or the bottom, you guys should see a button that says chat. Just make sure it's to everyone. That way everyone can see the question and Susan and Carol can look at it. While you guys are writing those questions up, I just want to say thank you guys so much for sticking out with the technical difficulties. it looks like we had multiple accounts and we're trying to switch back and forth who had the subscription or not. And so that's why once our 40-minute mark came up. But just so everyone knows too, whatever part you missed, we'll be uploading it to our Facebook page. So you will see, you know, the whole entire recording. It just might be part 1, part 2. But yeah, we'll be on for another minute or two if anyone has any questions. And thank you guys again for showing up, Carol and Susan. That was awesome. Being a pilot myself, like you mentioned before, Carol, there's a lot to learn to winter flying, and there's only, you know, so much you could read about. But, you know, you always learn from your instructors and more from other people around you. So it looks like we got our first question from, apologize, Arnie. How difficult was it to warm the engine before takeoff?
Well,
yep.
Because it was already heated with the reef preheater, it was no problem at all. So it was already up to, let's see, we probably had oil temperature of 100 in the first minute after startup.
Yeah, because the first day we plugged it in like right after you got there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Before we finished cleaning the snow off the wings. So we went in and found the heater and got that going right away. And then because we didn't actually move it, we left it plugged in overnight. So it was heating overnight. And
yeah.
so.
But we definitely checked that oil temperature gauge prior to takeoff,
Yeah.
And it was
Yeah.
in the green.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Sweet. Awesome.
Did we answer the question well enough, Arnie? Did we understand the question correctly?
Huh? Sweet.
Oh, putting wing covers on by yourself, that is can be tricky for sure, especially on a bigger airplane. Well, doing it when there's no wind, I would say it depends on the type of covers you have and your airplane, but some people have great tricks of rolling the wing cover up so that they can get on a ladder, if you will, at the wing tip, or if their airplane is small enough, they might not need a ladder. And then rowing it so that it unrolls over the top of the wing. Then, if you can get the tie-down strings or the bungees on either side of it, then you can help straighten it out from there. You can also coil it in such a fashion, or just bunch it up in such a fashion that you can start on the wingtip and get the bungees and walk underneath the wing with both bungees to the root. Again, it's real hard in the wind, but people do it. It's a lot easier to bring a friend. Some people could go on top of the wing too, but then you're dealing with the danger of that potential situation. So I've done that on a single turbine otter on skis before, and that was really scary. I don't want to do that again.
Yeah, that
maybe somebody else has good ideas about that. There's a lot of people that I see here that have a lot of experience that may have better ideas.
Yeah, I didn't think about rolling it up on the wing like that. That's actually interesting. Nice.
Yep. To me, if I have a friend, then I feel very accomplished if I have the perfect pole. In other words, we get it on there. We get the root section going. We did this, Susan, right?
Yeah.
So you're at the front, the leading edge, and I was at the trailing edge. And if we pull on our bungees at the exact same rate, if you're really lucky with no wind, it'll just pull on beautifully and cleanly. And there you go.
It worked pretty well with us, but there were two of us with no wind.
Yeah.
Nice.
I do know Les Zerbe. He is my dad.
Oh, okay.
There's a question there.
Yeah. I actually have a question too. So something I was taught, and I've been teaching my own students this too, is once I do get the engine started, during the run up, and sorry if maybe you guys mentioned this, I was in the middle of trying to send out emails to everybody to get back on. But during the run up, I've always been, to help kind of warm up the engine in the winter, I've always been told, like, put it up 200 RPMs, wait a second, another 200 RPMs, wait a second. And a part of me wonders, does that really help the engine kind of warm up better instead of just going from 1,000 to, 1,700 or whatever your run up RPM setting is?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you want to make sure that you don't apply takeoff power. Let me go back. There's what you can read in your aircraft manual, which often is the bare minimum, okay? And then there's a way you can be even kinder to your airplane. So some aircraft manuals say, don't apply takeoff power, or takeoff power may be applied as long as the engine runs smoothly. Well, frankly, I don't want to really find out sometimes on a short airstrip or on a glacier that my engine is not running smoothly, but I'm halfway down the glacier. So I was taught by people from Fairbanks who know code and airplanes to instead wait until anything more than taxi power applied, to wait until I am at least indicating at the bottom of the green arc. And again, others may have some other great tips that they could chime in on. And then if I wanted to heat up quicker, well, I typically don't go above 1,000 RPM until it is in the green arc. But you definitely would not want to go from a large jump, like say 1,000 RPM to 1,700, because the engine is just not, the engine and oil potentially is not heated up properly enough, and it's not going to lubricate and will cause more wear because you're flying at higher RPM. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. No, that's interesting.
Mute myself until I have to tell you.
Sweet. All right. Does anyone in our group here have any more questions for Carol and Susan? Leave it up for another minute or so. Herman Nelson is your friend. Well, that's nice.
Yeah, I remember the first time I used a Herman Nelson. I was flying a Dash 8 Q400 up to Dead Horse, and my co-pilot said, "We need a Herman Nelson," and I was like, "What is a Herman Nelson?" But they're very handy engine heaters.
You know what's so funny? I feel a little silly. I thought that was a human being's name, not a heater. So that's something new to learn every time. All right, sweet. Well, if nobody else has any more questions, please feel free to, email your questions, to Carol and Susan. I'll add their emails if they're comfortable with it, or if not, I'll add my next gen email for you guys to reach out to, and I'll, forward it to Carol and Susan. Thank you guys again for all your patience. I really appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a great night. All right.
Thanks,
Thank you guys
everybody.
again.
Bye.
Bye.